What's up, everyone? Just doing some charting on my phone right now. Obviously, Bitcoin just made a new high today before it dipped a little bit. So we need to discuss this today. Why is Bitcoin pumping? What does this mean for the altcoin market? And what am I doing as a result? Because I think there are some very interesting trades over the next couple of months, and I want to talk about them and how you can actually position your portfolio for success. So I'm kind of recreating what we did last week. We're just going to walk around on the beach here, and I'm just going to give you my candid thoughts on the market. I think I'm going to call this series Palm Walks because we're on the palm here in Dubai. So let me know what you think about that as a name. And yeah, just like last week, we're going to get into exactly what I think about the market right now. I'm going to answer some questions as well from the YouTube, and I'm going to give you guys my strategy for this next period in the market. If you see me looking down at my phone, it's because I have some notes written down so I get all the data correct for today's video. That's very, very important so I can actually deliver this to you in a concise format. So I'm going to break down what this breakout means for alts, how I think the rotation will unfold, and how I'm positioning for Q4. So before we get into that, I think we got to establish why is Bitcoin pumping, because there are a few variables right now which are actually triggering this move for Bitcoin. Look, ultimately this isn't a random breakout. This move, like all moves in crypto, are being driven by macro factors, and I think the main one is very clear. If you look across gold, if you look across equities, it's monetary debasement. Like across the board, currencies keep devaluing. You're seeing the US dollar down double digits this year so far. Obviously, you're seeing gold exploding as a response. And if you look at the M2 liquidity index, which is a measure of how much liquidity there is in the global market, you are seeing a massive spike. Now, interestingly, as we've highlighted on the channel over the past couple of weeks, Bitcoin hasn't come to parity with the rapid increase that we've recently seen in M2. So there was a huge discrepancy, and I actually said over the channel last weekend during a similar walk that I did, except this time I have my videographer, so it's a little bit better. And over the channel over the past couple of weeks, I've pointed out the fact that typically when Bitcoin is lagging, it ends up coming back to parity with M2 and back with gold. And I think a lot of this move is simply down to the fact that Bitcoin was a coiled spring, and eventually we knew once the dam wall, burst, it was going to move a lot higher. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to explode right away to 140, 150, but I do think Bitcoin is in a good position from a macro perspective to outperform. And if you actually look at the chart right now, the weekly chart, it looks very strong, and just balance of probabilities, it looks like Bitcoin wants to go much higher. The other reason why Bitcoin is going up, I think, is because the institutional backdrop and the sovereign backdrop with regulation is just so much stronger for Bitcoin than it's ever been. So it's not only this race to get into hard assets like Bitcoin from high net worth individuals or people that just want to, protect their stack against US devaluation. There's also, I think, all of this capital that was waiting on the sidelines that can now access Bitcoin through the ETFs, that can now play in the crypto playground because of the precedent that the Trump family is setting. Obviously, Trump's son has been pushing into all of his crypto projects and, stable coins and World Liberty Finance, which I think has opened the floodgates even more for better regulation around crypto and has opened the floodgates for further adoption of crypto, which I think makes this a really interesting time in the market. I mean, we're starting to see these big companies all launch tokens. We're starting to see deregulation across the board, which is actually fostering innovation in the US for crypto. So despite altcoins underperforming overall, and we're going to speak about why that's the case in today's video, I'm very optimistic about where the industry currently sits, and I do think that's going to create over this period, huge upside for the market. But going back to price action on Bitcoin, Bitcoin has obviously been super strong. And I do think even if you are sidelined, so let's say you theoretically held 100% of your portfolio in altcoins, I still think you're in a really good position to capitalize from this current move. And the reason for that is, as I pointed out in last week's walk and talk here on the palm, you can see the Atlantis and a nice little sunset view behind us. As I pointed out last week, the rotation that typically happens in the market is we go risk off for a period in time where we'll risk out of altcoins back into Bitcoin. That's what we're seeing at the moment, and it's something that I anticipated. And then we typically see that rotation back from Bitcoin into Ethereum, into Solana, and then into other altcoins. So what we are now seeing is the market resetting. We are seeing that reset because we had the rotation from Bitcoin, ETH, Solana, and alts. The altcoin leg wasn't that strong because Bitcoin didn't have continued upside. Now we are seeing liquidity rotate back into Bitcoin, and that is evident through the spike that we are seeing in dominance. And last week I pointed out the fact that I thought that Bitcoin needed to actually run to create upside for altcoins. And coming here a week later, giving you guys another update here, I can tell you that that is exactly the situation that is being created right now. Bitcoin's upside is attracting liquidity, it's attracting attention, it's attracting mindshare, which hopefully is going to funnel back into the rest of the market and create opportunities through the rest of the market. And that's something that I'll teach you guys how to capitalize on later in this video. So even if you haven't, even if you aren't full stack Bitcoin, and I'm certainly not full stack Bitcoin, I don't think there's a reason to fret, or I don't think there's a reason to FOMO into Bitcoin. I think you should actually be happy, even theoretically if you own no Bitcoin, that at the end of the day, the positive sentiment and the liquidity injection and lift that you get from Bitcoin performing well is going to create opportunities in the altcoin market. Not only because of a potential liquidity rotation that typically occurs once Bitcoin puts in a high, which it hasn't yet, but also because of the increased sentiment that happens off the back of Bitcoin performing. As Bitcoin goes to 130, 135, 140, 145, 150, and potentially even higher, that creates a lift amongst the altcoin market because it heightens not only the amount of liquidity coming into the market, but also the upwards trajectory, so the ceiling that the rotation could potentially be. Because what happened, and the reason why Ethereum ran so hard about a month ago, is because Bitcoin had run so much relative to ETH that ETH just had so much catching up to do. And then the ETF buyers worked this out and the funds worked this out through their DATs, and they decided that they were going to beat Ethereum. Then we saw that massive rotation from Bitcoin to ETH. So I actually think it's the ETH pump and the ETH rotation that has the most tangible wealth effect for altcoins, and it's why that's such a strong side effect of Bitcoin performing well, and why I think you're in a good position to capitalize even if you don't necessarily hold that much Bitcoin. So in light of that, this is how I expect the rotation to unfold. As I said last week, I think we're in for a few weeks of Bitcoin outperformance now. That's just what the chart is saying. I'm going to be monitoring for a potential reversal. It is going to happen at some point, and liquidity is going to rotate back into Ethereum and alts. But I'm going to be tracking the H4 and the H8, and also daily for confirmation, because I think these are the best timeframes to assert a confirmed reversal. What happens is Bitcoin will reverse probably into Ethereum. That's where you'll see ETH starting to catch up, and then you'll see the market starting to front run the trend on alts. This can be front run slightly before Bitcoin puts in a cycle peak, although I do think the biggest rotation for altcoins will happen once Bitcoin puts in its cycle peak. And I'd just be guessing, but maybe somewhere around 140, 150K lines up. I've been saying since April this year, my plan hasn't deviated, my outlook hasn't deviated. I'm expecting a high on Bitcoin between Q4 and Q1 next year. It does look like we're heading into that period now, not only from a seasonality perspective, but also based on how the price action looks right now. I don't think you need to front run, and then maybe this is, slightly not controversial, but against what other creators are saying, but I don't think you need to front run the market too much. Like, there's this natural kind of instinct to, if we're going to get a rotation eventually, then shouldn't we be fully positioning in alts right now, because when the rotation comes, then we'll capitalize. I think that logic is slightly true, but at the same time, let's say the peak doesn't happen until Q1. The altcoins you select now actually may not be the exact alts, because the amount of launches that are coming onto the market that end up pumping when the overall market pumps. So although I know there's this instinct to pre-position super aggressively, and don't get me wrong, I've done it a little bit, I think you should be careful with that instinct and try and keep some liquidity to take advantage of new opportunities in the market, because we've noticed a lot of the outperformers this cycle are actually the new launches. I mean, just think about it. Over the past few months, what has outperformed? Asta, relatively new token. Apex, it's been around for a couple of years, but relatively new token. Plasma recently, the stablecoin protocols, some of the new chains have outperformed. Some of the rebrands have outperformed. Like, I remember when Maple turned into Syrup, really started outperforming. So a lot of the new trends are the newer tokens either coming to the market or the newer rebrands. There aren't that many tokens that were around since 2020, 2021, maybe apart from like Solana and Ethereum and a few others that are really outperforming. I mean, even Hyperliquid this year has been like the strongest performer. That's also a new token. So I think the real alpha and the real opportunity are in these new shiny launches where the teams can engineer the tokenomics and engineer the marketing strategy to take advantage of new trends, and they don't have the underwater bag holders that all of these other projects have. Like, this is not throwing shade on AVAX, but I'll just use it as an example. Like, there would be a lot of people from last cycle that are still holding AVAX and are underwater, and because you have those prior highs, there's natural short interest, perp interest that accumulates to the short side as price starts to hit previous technical targets. So I guess the problem with older coins, and the reason they typically don't pump as much, is because there are these targets that, you know, kind of act as points of resistance on the chart. Not only because there are people actually selling that are underwater, but also because new people step in and short. So I think the real way to capitalize on this altcoin trend in the market is looking towards the new launches where there's no bag holder resistance and liquidity's fresh and momentum's really fresh in the market. So how can you actually spot these launches? Well, obviously just staying in the know. I'll keep you updated on the channel, for example, so make sure you subscribe when these launch. But staying in the know, going through X each day, having a system for, you know, staying engaged with the market, I think that's super, super important. Being in the right Discords, Telegram communities. For example, I have the Mars High Club where we keep you up to date before a lot of these launches. Fabian today in the Discord was doing lots of updates on some new projects that are launching. I think this is like a really plus EV thing to do at the moment. Have a watch list and, you know, track it however you want. You could have it on Notion, you could have it on Notes, you could have it on Google Sheets, but have a watch list where you track a lot of these new launches, because I think these are going to be massive opportunities in the market. Another thing you can do apart from social media and apps like, you know, Discord, Telegram, X, YouTube, is actually use dashboards to track the launches. So there are two tools I like. One tool is cookie.fun. It's an amazing tool because you can actually sort tokens for Mindshare, and then you can go through the Mindshare list and you can see the tokens, they say pre-TGE, that are gaining traction, that are actually pre-launch. This is great for not only spotting good new potential launches, but also for spotting potential airdrop opportunities, because new launch trading and airdrop farming kind of go hand in hand. You don't need to farm the airdrops, but, you know, best believe if there is a new launch, there's probably going to be some sort of airdrop or at the very least community incentive to get into that coin. Another thing you can use is DeFi Llama. They have their airdrops tab or tokenless protocols tab, which is not just relevant for airdrop farming, but it's also extremely relevant for seeing when new tokens are launching and coming out. So that's another tool that I would use to actually track this stuff. I think you need to get organized. So obviously you can't create a trading view or a CoinGecko watch list before something's listed, but what you can do is you can create a Notion, and this is probably the best thing to do because you can type in all of your new launches and then you can add a comment field, a comment section where you write your investment notes. So you can create like a mini SWOT analysis, get Grok to help you to just track all of this stuff. So that is definitely something where I would be investing at least a couple of hours a week, and is something where I'm investing a couple of hours a week. And I think that underlines a point that I've been saying on the channel a lot recently, why I think it's important to have liquidity at the moment, because you don't know when the next best trade is going to come. I didn't know a few weeks ago that I was about to hit my best trade of the year, which was Asta, and that ended up being a 7-figure trade for me. I had absolutely no idea that was about to happen. So you need to constantly be on your toes, and I'm expecting at any point in time, I'm going to get the next big trade opportunity that I size into. There was a trade that I sized into last week in the Discord. That was Athea, so that's been my most recent trade. I went in with similar size to the Asta trade. I'm slightly in profit now. I think there's going to be buybacks starting very soon, so that's why I'm in that trade, but I have an invalidation for it, of course. Extremely important at this stage in the cycle to have invalidations on your trades, because as we head to the end of the cycle, you actually want to be a little bit more careful with your risk management because your window of opportunity is typically a bit less. Another token that I'm tracking, I started to enter, but then as I said in the Discord, I stopped entering, is XPL. I like the concept of, you know, it being like the tether chain, but I think some of the recent news that came out about, you know, Paolo not being that involved, I watched Rand's interview, that kind of softened my thesis a bit. But the main thing that softened my thesis, was the fact that price action started to look weak. And I think this is a good bit of advice for you in the market right now. You typically only want to be in the tokens that look strong. And furthermore from that, you only want to be in the tokens that are exhibiting an uptrend versus Bitcoin. Because it's one thing to make money in US dollar terms, but in a period in the market where Bitcoin is in price discovery, you actually want to be making money in terms of Bitcoin. Because ultimately, what's the goal? It's not only to make money, it's to stack more Bitcoin. Or at least if you believe like me, that Bitcoin is a purer form of hard money than fiat. Like over time, my goal is to stack more Bitcoin. So the only way I'm going to do it is actually tracking my altcoin trades and tracking my altcoin trends versus Bitcoin. I think it's very important that you think of each altcoin investment actually not as an investment, but as a trade. Thinking of investing as investing can become a bit of a cop-out sometimes, because it kind of gives you this excuse to not have time horizons on your trades. Like you can say, oh, I'm investing in this coin, so it doesn't matter if it goes down because I'm an investor. Well, the reality is every single coin that you buy, every single investment that you buy, it's actually a trade. Like even if I want to hold Bitcoin for 10 years, that's a Bitcoin trade. It's just a 10-year trade. So you have to be very realistic about yourselves when you, when you buy altcoins, that you actually have a time horizon on that trade. So if you're entering a coin, the time horizon could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 months, it could be a year, it could be 6 months, but be very realistic about it. Personally, I think over this next period in the market, the highest upside time frames are going to be like 1 to 2 month holds. I think 1 month is enough for a narrative to outperform without being in the narrative too long to see Mindshare fading away. Because you have to understand, especially at this stage in the market, it's very much an attention game. So attention is going to dictate where liquidity goes. Money flows where attention goes. So that's why it's so important to actually track Mindshare. You can use Cookie once again to do this, to actually see what coins are gaining traction. You can also use Grok to see what people are speaking about. But the second you start to see something lose Mindshare, that is also potentially an invalidation. And the reality is, everything is an attention trade. Even the Asta trade, which I still think could potentially have some upside for here, the majority of the upside was locked in as soon as attention started to focus away from Asta into other protocols. You know, it went into Plasma for a little bit. Next week there'll be a new launch where, you know, liquidity concentrates into that launch. That also makes it hard holding altcoins for too long in this environment. So I think framing things as a trade is the best way to go. So just to wrap things up here, and then I'm going to answer a few questions. I think that Bitcoin going up is a great thing for altcoins overall because it creates a positive environment from a sentiment perspective, and it creates a positive liquidity environment for that rotation to happen into ETH, and that will really benefit alts. So I do think balance of probabilities, we do see a good 1 to 2 quarters for alts, but just because we're going to see a good maybe quarter, 2 quarters doesn't necessarily mean, you know, you should go all into alts, because of that rule I've been speaking about on the channel, which is over time, as you get towards the end of a cycle, you want to dial up the risk. So for me, dialing up the risk is going bigger into certain opportunities when I see, you know, outsized returns, when I see asymmetric risk profiles on those trades. But overall, I am going in with less size in terms of the percentage that I'm allocating to crypto with my overall portfolio. Like right now, I'm sitting closer to 50% stables. You know, at other points in the cycle, I've been 20, 30% in stables. So protecting more of my capital and, you know, keeping some leeway for trades, I think is a super important thing to do at this stage. So before we get into questions, just want to admire the view here. We got the Dubai Marina over there. It's quite nice. I'm really enjoying this series. It's quite fun being able to get out of the office, because all my videos, they're like in the studio hunched over. It's cool to get out under the moonlight or at sunset and do some crypto market updates this way. So the question is it too late to buy Bitcoin now? I don't think it's ever too late to buy Bitcoin. Like, one of my strategies over time is to continually add to my Bitcoin base. However, my rule is to always buy Bitcoin, and like the market in general, to be honest, on big dips, in terms of sizing up into my overall portfolio. So right now I wouldn't be aping into Bitcoin. I'd probably wait for a correction. And look, given the fact I'm already happy with my Bitcoin exposure, I do want more, by the way, but for this cycle, I think what my plan will be is to ape more into Bitcoin in the next bear market. And, you know, that could be a mini bear trend that happens from, who knows, January to April. It could be February to August, or it could be a longer bear market like some people expect. Whatever it is, if we get a sustained period of weakness, I'll definitely be flicking on the dollar cost averages. But if you don't have any Bitcoin exposure, I don't think it's ever a bad idea. Of course, not financial advice, but never a bad idea to add a little bit, in my opinion. But obviously, you know, it also depends how much money you're playing with. If you're trying to make 50 grand off $1,000, well, Bitcoin's not going to be the pool for you. But if you're trying to protect capital, Bitcoin is probably a much better asset. So it depends where you're at as well.
Nice. When do you think Altseason will start?
All right, when do I think Altseason's going to start? Well, I kind of disagree with this Altseason like wording. I don't think we're going to see this cycle absolutely everything fly up at once. I still don't believe that. I know some creators do. I know some people do. I think a better way to think of it are periods of risk on and periods of risk off. So this 2021-esque altcoin season, forget about it. Different conditions now, less liquidity coming into the retail market, but also more altcoin dilution. So the way I think about altcoins now is we're entering a risk on period. Risk on periods will create opportunities. Risk on periods will bode very well for select altcoins, but just because select altcoins will outperform doesn't mean everything will outperform Bitcoin. So you're going to see some stuff outperforming Bitcoin. I don't think everything's going to outperform Bitcoin. So just make sure you're concentrated in the right assets and make sure you have the flexibility and the freedom to potentially trade the right assets as those setups arise. So the question is, if the big runners are in new coins, how do normal people find them early? Well, I think some of the steps I said before are great. I think ultimately though, if I was to simplify it down, finding new launches and new runners just comes down to awareness. So I think just building that system, and it could be 10 minutes a morning, 20 minutes a morning, it could even be once every few days if you have less time, just having a system where you go through your feed, where you bookmark, posts and take note of those posts and have a system for it. I think that is the best way to actually spot this stuff. It's all just about being aware. Have a few YouTubers, you watch all of their videos, you take notes and you track it, and then you have a system for actually tracking these new launches. And that could be on Notion, that could be on Notes. I think that's what it comes down to. It doesn't take a genius to see the trends, but it does take awareness. And that's where most people fall off. They go in and out in terms of their interest in the market. 1 week the market's pumping, they're super interested. Next week the market's not pumping, they're disinterested. I think the best investors, and this is something I've managed to do, and a lot of my close friends who have succeeded in this industry have managed to do, is they're always constantly locked into the market. So no matter what the market is doing, even if it's bearish, they're still putting in their reps. All right, maybe if the market's boring, they're not doing 8 hours a day, that might be suboptimal, might be plus EV to go and focus on researching other areas, but at least spending that 30 minutes a day to anchor yourself and be aware of what's happening. Because the people that have been aware of what's happening over the last 6 months have done really, really well. And there's opportunities I've capitalized on, like Asta recently and the Apex trade recently, and that have been really good. But there have been even opportunities from my other Discord analysts, like Fabian, for example, who's been farming the lighter airdrop in April, and now they're going for around $80 and touted to be $100 per point. $100 per point means if you add 5,000 points, you're going to get $500,000 worth of an airdrop. And 5,000 points in the beginning was not hard to accumulate. So that's an example of if you were, focused on the market and knew about the dexes that were launching, that would have been on your radar. It was on my radar. I actually had a group chat with the team, but I just didn't act on it. So that just shows you that it's not just about awareness; it's also about action. But there's always opportunities in crypto, and I think the past few months have really been proof of that. So best industry in the world, in my opinion, because of the amount of opportunities. And here's the thing as well, like I did a tweet the other day about stocks. A lot of people now are like, oh, equities are doing well, crypto's doing bad or worse. I'll just pivot into stock trading. Here's the thing, and this is why I'm still in crypto and I'm not in stocks. Building an edge in crypto is much easier because there's way more information asymmetry relative to the liquidity. So there are so many opportunities for you to spot something. For example, if you're putting in the reps of, you're on project AMAs and they leak a bit of alpha in the AMA and there's only 50 people there and you can trade on that and you do some math based on valuation, you realize it's undervalued. That's an information asymmetry. There's also a speed asymmetry where news might get announced and you're acting quicker than other people. News might be announced on Pump Fund launching a layer 1. You might look at the second order effect of not just longing Pump Fund, but you might short Solana because that eats into Solana's L1 market share. So that would be a news trade that you can make if that announcement gets announced or the news breaks and you're quicker than everyone else because everyone else will be reacting late to the news. If you're in Europe and it's announced then and US wakes up later, you have a potential time or speed asymmetry there. So it's all about capitalizing on asymmetries in the market, and I just don't find that to be the case in equities. Like I hold equities, I have a long-term portfolio, and I know if you network and are good at fundamentally analyzing small caps, you can make money there. I'm not denying that, but the reason I haven't gone into that space full time with my time and my energy and attention is because I still think crypto is the most liquid and space just full of opportunity. So I think it's the best place to be, honestly, especially if you're retail, because what other industry are you literally getting thousands of dollars for interacting with the DEX? Like it's insane, and I'm just proven time and time again that there are so many opportunities in this market.
A lot of people hold bags from 2021. Should they sell now or should they wait? What should they do?
Yeah, so this is a question I get asked a lot. Should I sell this altcoin now? I've been holding it for a while. Or should I, hold on to it? The answer is just do the overnight test, which is basically this. If that position was magically liquidated overnight, would you rebuy the position as an instinct in the morning? If you wouldn't rebuy the position, then you probably shouldn't be holding it. If you'd only rebuy half, then you should probably hold half, because you're basically committing by holding a token to being long at that current price at that current point in time. I personally think there's never a bad time to rotate or rebalance, because you should always be in the highest conviction stuff at every moment. If you're holding onto a coin and you don't really know what it's doing or you don't have much conviction, I don't really see a problem with selling if you're underwater if there's a genuine other opportunity in the market which you think is going to outperform. It's all about opportunity cost. You want to be in the basket of assets which is going to give you the best chance of succeeding. And if there are coins in your portfolio which you don't think are going to give you the best chance of succeeding, then why are you in those coins? I know it's, you know, emotionally hard sometimes. It's easier said than done, letting go of a position because you're scared that it's going to pump after you sell it. But I think that feeling and dealing with that in the short term is a lot better than looking back in 6 months and being like, damn, I underperformed because I wasn't able to make the ruthless decisions that I needed to outperform.
Nice. Okay, last one.
Last question.
Always talk about patience and conviction. What does that actually look like day to day?
What does patience and conviction look like day to day? I think patience is so important because, you know, you kind of have to think of yourself as like a lion in crypto. Like, you're constantly prowling, you're constantly looking for your prey, but you're not like attacking everything that comes by, you know, or you're going to scare off the other animals. So you've got to wait and be, or a tiger, whatever analogy you want to use, you know, you've got to wait to be very strategic about when you're going to pounce and eat that prey and get like a big haul for yourself. So I think it's similar in crypto. You don't want to like bite or nibble or waste attention or waste energy on every single opportunity in the market. Patience is actually about constant awareness, constant consistency, but then knowing when to size up into a specific trade that's going to deliver you outsized returns. And oftentimes it's really just a game of waiting and doing nothing 90% of the time, and it's only really 10% of the time you're acting. But I do see this, you know, people, and it's retail, they have this propensity to, I guess technically I'm retail as well, but anyway, you know what I mean? You know, have the propensity to like try and force a trade all the time, like every single day that they want to trade. What coin do I buy? What coin do I buy? But like, you don't, if you're asking what coin do I buy, that's already an answer. You shouldn't be buying anything because it should be pretty obvious to you and you should know when there's an opportunity. And I think, you know, it's all about being patient and waiting for that opportunity and then striking when it comes, and not scaring off your prey by constantly chasing, or then you'll never catch anything. So yeah, look, I think that wraps things up. That's all the questions. I'll see you guys in the next one. I'll do market updates next week as usual. Got some banger content coming for you guys. I'm gonna head back now and see you in the next one. Peace out.